Hello, and welcome to What is Innovation? The podcast that explores the reality of a word that is in danger of losing its meaning altogether. This podcast is produced by Outlast Consulting, LLC, a boutique consultancy that helps companies use innovation principles to solve their toughest business problems. I'm your host, Jared Simmons, and I'm so excited to have Lorraine Marchand. Lorraine Marchand is Executive Managing Director of Merative, formerly IBM Watson Health, and has 3 decades of experience in new product development. She has held leadership positions at Bristol Myers Squibb, Covance, Cognizant, and she co-founded 4 companies. Marchand is an adjunct professor of management and serves on the Healthcare and Pharmaceutical Management Program Advisory Board at Columbia Business School and is an adjunct professor of innovation and entrepreneurship at Yeshiva University's Katz School of Science and Health. She is also an investor member of venture firm Plum Alley. Lorraine, I'm so excited to have you on the show today. I can't wait for you to share your thoughts with our audience. And thank you for taking the time to do it.
Oh, well, Jared, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you very much for asking me to be your guest this afternoon.
Well, it's a pleasure. Let's dive right in. What, in your mind, is innovation?
Well, Jared, I like to answer that question by first starting with the fact that innovation is a mindset. And to me, that mindset is described and defined by 3 things: an insatiable curiosity, a passion for problem solving, and embracing change. And the job of the innovator is to solve problems. And most importantly, because innovation has been dubbed as more of a modern day term, it really reflects a desire to bring a new product, service, or way of doing something to the market. It should have commercial value. It should have commercial benefit. So to me, that's the innovator, because we've got to start with the innovator. The person doing the innovating is where we have to start, right at the head.
Right.
And then that's what the innovator is determined to accomplish.
Okay. That is fantastic. I love that. Innovation is a mindset, and then the elements of that mindset are fascinating to me. Tell me more about curiosity. What does that look like in the innovator, and what does it look like in practice?
That's a terrific question. And I like to think back about children. And when children are growing up, and when they're 2 years old, if you've had a 2-year-old, or as they go through grade school, they just incessantly ask why. And they ask those why questions until they're really satisfied that they got to the nugget of what the issue or the problem is, and that they really understand it. And so if we think about the child's asking why, a lot of times I think what happens is, as we go through school and we're in such a rote environment, and then it starts to become somewhat intimidating if you don't have the right answers to things. Our curiosity starts to taper off as we hit adulthood, and we feel as though we have to know the answer. We can't ask why questions, and that we're going to be humiliated if we don't know the answer to something. And so what we need to do as we hit adulthood is take off that veil of concern or intimidation and get refreshed with the idea of asking why, and not being satisfied until we really understand the questions, the issues behind whatever it is that we're concerned about, whatever it is that we're vexed by. So when I teach innovation, it starts with helping people to get tapped into their curiosity again. So a lot of times I'll ask adults in a Fortune 1000 company if we're going to talk about what innovation is. And so often they say, oh boy, I don't feel innovative. That's what Steve Jobs and Elon Musk and the founders of Uber and Lyft do. That's not me. But when we start to break it down and say, you know what, tell me a time when you were 12 years old and you did something really amazing, something that you were proud of, where you were creative, or maybe we'll use the term innovative. You
Sure.
did something different. You solved a problem. Take me back to that moment when you had that satisfaction of tackling something, creating something, solving a problem. They might have to think a little bit, but they can usually go back and pull up that story. And that's the building block. It's like, you know how you felt that day? You know how you felt when you recounted that story in your mind and brought it to this workshop? That's what curiosity is. That's what we need to get back to. You're looking around at problems that you face every day. You're not satisfied with the fact that things are in a default or a status quo, and you take it upon yourself to break that problem down, maybe keep a journal of problems that you observe on a day-to-day basis. I usually suggest that it's a really good habit. Just every day, write down 3 problems that you observed. It could be something that you saw in traffic. It could be the fact that your coffee maker didn't do something that you wanted it to do properly. Whatever it is, just start noticing again.
Noticing. That is such an important aspect of curiosity. And I've never really kind of connected those two things, but to be curious about something, you have to notice it in the first place. I had never thought about that. I also love this aspect of intimidation that you highlighted, because that's also something that you don't really think about when you think about curiosity. But we are naturally curious. If our child states are any indication, we are naturally curious. And for us to have grown to a point as adults where we're not consciously curious, there had to have been something that taught you not to be curious. And that's a form of intimidation. And it's almost this element of certainty that adults are so fond of, almost kind of creates almost like a bullying type of environment where you're intimidated into abandoning the question, why? Because you're supposed to know already.
That's exactly right. And I think that a lot of times in corporations, the way that presents itself is that, again, a corporation exists in order to do something very well, do it repeatedly, do it at scale, have well-heeled processes, have people who know all the answers. But the fact is that innovation thrives in an environment that embraces uncertainty, thrives in an environment that allows us to fail, quote unquote.
Right.
And so much of when we innovate, it has to sometimes be trial and error. Edison invented 1,000 different technologies, things, however you want to describe it. Not all of them were ultimately successful.
Right.
Very few that we actually recall. But that doesn't mean that he and his team stopped on any given day, not continuing to innovate because they developed something that didn't end up working out or going forward. It was that dedication to maybe this concept of continuous process, continuous innovation, continuous improvement.
Right.
And so you have to embrace an environment where it's okay, and I won't say failure, but it's okay not to be successful. And one of the things that I do like about what Jeff Bezos inculcated in Amazon was that he actually incentivized not being successful with the ideas and the products and the services that you brought ideas to the market for.
Right.
He incentivized failure. He knew that it was only if you felt really comfortable bringing ideas to the fore and that you didn't get the blue ribbon every time they were successful, but you still got credited for trying. He knew that that was the kind of environment and the kind of culture that needed to be created for innovation to thrive.
Right.
And I personally replace the word failure with pivot. And my view is that innovation is a series of pivots. And if one avenue that you're pursuing doesn't work out, as long as you're staying true to your vision, you can adjust some strategy, you can adjust some tactics, you can move in a slightly different direction. And as long as you're learning and you're bringing that learning forward into your work and into how you're thinking or into the next way that you're innovating, then I think that you're creating a very stimulating and continuously improving process that is the heart of innovation. So we don't fail, we pivot.
I love that. I love that. The great thing about substituting that word pivot, it actually moves it closer to what you're actually trying to say. Because the only word we have for what happens is failure. And it kind of tells you a bit about our society and our culture that when these things happen, you try to do something and it doesn't happen, then that's deemed a failure, full stop. And to think about pivoting, it takes the focus away from the outcome and puts it back on the action that you can take. And I really like that a lot.
And I think it really dismisses this intimidation factor, right?
It does.
Now I'm not intimidated. I don't have to have the right answer. I just have to have moved my idea or the process forward, maybe even added incrementally to our understanding. And I can be credited and rewarded for that and feel as though I'm contributing to innovation as well, because I am.
Exactly. And this is another tried and true, almost trite phrase that's now in the innovation world, but it lets you embrace uncertainty. So it really becomes part of how you work. You don't have to know because you can always pivot. And so I think that is a really freeing way to think about it. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. So everyone has been trained in a method of problem solving. So I'm an engineer. I worked at P&G. I worked at McKinsey. So I have been trained in 3 very structured, very rote ways of solving problems. What does problem solving mean in an innovation context when you talk about it?
Well, I think that it's very fundamental in innovation to get the problem right.
Right.
So I said my definition is solving a problem. And I usually say a problem that a customer is willing to pay for. That's the commercial aspect of it.
Yeah.
So the methods that I like are all around deconstructing the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, Elon Musk is really big on deconstruction. And the method that he uses is called first principles.
Mm-hmm.
And so from a product perspective, it tears the product apart and it gets down to the basic components. And I think a great example of that is when he took on the challenge of reducing the cost of building a car battery.
Right.
They said that the car batteries were $60,000. We'd never be able to bring the cost down. And he said, you know what? Wait a minute. And he actually took the car battery. He took all the parts apart. He looked at what was most fundamental to make that battery operate. And he decided that it was the chromium component and that you didn't need a lot of the other parts in the battery. And when he brought it back to that first principle, he was able to develop that battery for $25,000 instead of $60,000. So I think that deconstruction and going back to first principles is a great way to think about innovation, but it's not the only one.
Yeah.
There's also a methodology called reframing. And reframing is terrific. In fact, at Disney, they use reframing. And a lot of times they have to deal with the fact that they have very long lines for a ride. And the first thing that any of us might do is say, wow, how can I reduce the length of the queue? Could I put people in different lines? Could I move them to a different ride? Like, what do I do just to make sure that they don't have to stand in line so long? But the Disney innovators reframed it and they said, well, look, I have people captive for 30 minutes standing in line. What can I do to amuse them, to entertain them, to whatever it might be? And could I make the experience of being in the line actually fun? They do this on Broadway. If you've ever gone up to the Tix counter in New York to buy a ticket and you're standing in line, the actors will come out in costumes. So the whole SpongeBob cast will come out and start to talk with you and joke around and have a lot of fun with the audience.
Yeah.
I think reframing is an interesting one. Bill Gates likes the technique of analogy or metaphor. So let's not reinvent the wheel. Like, let's say this is like, and then look at what it's like. So those are at least 3 different types of deconstruction methods. And then the one that we talked about at the beginning of the show here, what I'll call the 4-year-old method of innovation, which is a series of whys until I'm satisfied. But, you know, whichever method you're using, and I think each of them fit the situation a little bit differently. You can try all 4, you can pick one. The idea is that it should get you down to that nugget or that fundamental component of what that problem is. And then from there, I think it's really important, as you've gotten your aha moments during the deconstruction, that you create a very specific and measurable problem statement. So what happened, to what, why, how significant is it? So that you can really understand and quantify the magnitude of the problem and why it's occurring. So those two pieces go hand in hand, I think.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic. I love those examples and the crisp problem statement. And to focus on the front end of the problem solving process, or front end of the whatever process you want to call it, innovation, product development, whatever, to focus on the front end of that process sometimes is a challenge in a broader organization, as I'm sure you've run into as you're advising folks, because most companies, most Fortune 1000 companies live on a 90-day life cycle. And that clock is always ticking in senior leaders' minds that they're going to have to answer to the broader stakeholders in 90 days. And it permeates the entire organization. And so for Disney and Microsoft and these other companies to kind of have that front end focus is really a testament to their senior leadership and their willingness to say, you know what, I'll brave this. You keep doing the work that actually drives innovation.
The cultural aspect of innovation is so critical. You're absolutely right, Jared. And I think that whether it's a small organization or a large organization, that dedication to the innovation mindset has got to start at the top. It has to be rewarded. This idea of the failure, the pivot, showing people what curiosity looks like, what problem solving looks like,
right,
helping them embrace change, making it feel safe. All of that is just really critical. And I do think that we see those organizations definitely outpacing others in terms of growth and revenue and all of the metrics that they're so keen on following on.
Right, exactly. So we've talked a lot about what innovation is and the elements of an innovative mindset, the focus on the front end of problem solving, the deconstruction phase, and pivoting versus thinking about failure. What isn't innovation?
Yeah, well, that's a perfect question. I guess I should also say, just before we leave, what I think good innovation looks like is that it's not the aha, eureka moment. It really is, once you understand that problem, taking yourself through a disciplined process of designing solutions, testing them, talking to customers, de-risking them. So I believe that it's a very disciplined, stepwise process, which is why I've laid that out in my book.
Yes.
What it isn't, so let me give you an example. The Upjohn company, about 25 years ago, you may recall, they launched a product called Rogaine. You know what Rogaine is used for?
I do know what it's used for. I don't use it, as you can see, but the listeners can't. But yes, I do know what it's used for.
Yeah, it's for male pattern
baldness. Yeah.
Yeah. But the thing most people don't know is that the Upjohn company was actually studying Rogaine for a certain type of cardiac problem. And the clinical trial participants were middle-aged men, many of whom had male pattern baldness. And when they were on the product, they had hair growth. So the Upjohn company was very observant, and they realized that they needed to do something with this. They revamped the clinical trials, and Rogaine for male pattern baldness launched ahead of Rogaine for the original cardiovascular indication.
Wow.
I call that kind of innovation serendipity. And it's a little bit like winning the lottery. It's very alluring, and we hope it's going to happen once in a lifetime. But chances are it won't, and it won't necessarily be the kind of innovation that you or I are involved in.
Right.
A second type is disruptive innovation. And we see this all the time. So the development of the iPhone or the disruptive innovation of Uber or Lyft. So I call those big hunt innovations because they completely transform business models, the way we operate. They really have a lasting impact.
Right.
And while those are really exciting as well, those are not typically the way innovation occurs either. And then the third one that I actually do see a lot, but I don't recommend it, is I can give you another example. When I was early in my innovation career, I had a colleague who had licensed a diagnostic technology from a lab in Israel. and it could measure different kinds of stress in very different kinds of body fluids.
Oh, wow.
And it was like super cool technology. It could measure oxidative stress in any kind of body fluid. And we were rushing to try to figure out how to get this to market. And the problem was that this oxidative stress that I described is in just about every disease process in the body.
Oh, right. Right.
Yeah, so we quickly found that trying to narrow down, find an indication, understand, doctors, patients that might be a fit.
Mm-hmm.
So when innovation, you've got to be really efficient with your capital. You've got to be able to move pretty quickly to solve the problem. And so, long story short, we ran out of capital and the investors got a little impatient with us. And so I call that kind of innovation where you have the super cool technology and now you're trying to figure out what problem to solve with it. Mm-hmm. I call that Field of Dreams. That's the Kevin Costner movie where shoeless Joe Jackson comes to him every night in a dream. Kevin Costner lives in an Iowa cornfield and he encourages him to build a baseball field in the middle of the Iowa cornfield. And he says, build it and they will come. So I call that kind of innovation, build it and they will come. And honestly, I see it 98, 99% of the time. And I don't recommend that either. Mm-hmm. So I believe that innovation that starts with a problem, deconstructs it, really clear that there's a customer on the other side who wants to have this problem solved, and then goes through the methodology of testing different solutions. My dad taught me the law of three. Growing up, we always had to come up with 3 solutions to every problem.
That's perfect.
Testing it for fit or a minimal viable prototype, talking to customers, I say 100 customers in order to get plenty of feedback, thinking about the risk. That's the kind of innovation that ultimately will be successful in bringing your product, your service, your new way of working to the market.
Yes, I love those buckets. Serendipity, Big Hunt, and Field of Dreams. That pretty much covers the landscape. And your description of the Field of Dreams reminds me of one of my favorite Maslow quotes, where he says, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And it's the same kind of principle around the Field of Dreams, I think, where you've got this technology and all of a sudden, because you have that in your hand, everything looks like an opportunity to use it.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Jared. So, and human nature just allows us to go to solutions, to take this technology and to figure out all the different ways that we think we can use the hammer, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
In a way, you have to unlearn, you know what I mean? You really have to unlearn how you've been trained to think, which is why I just think for me, one of those first principles is going back to the way children question and how they think. We can learn an awful lot if we hearken back to when we were younger.
No, that's a great example because everyone was younger once. And so it's not one of these things that only applies to engineers or only applies to journalists or only applies to musicians or whatever. Everyone was 5. So that is something you can ask people to look back at with confidence. You alluded to the lessons you learned from your father. You talked a bit about this opportunity you had with the technology in Israel. How has innovation shaped your career?
Well, when I was 12 years old, my dad, who was a serial inventor, an inventor was different from innovator because the word invention by its nature indicates that you're creating an improvement or something for which you can file intellectual property patents.
Right.
And innovation is a more modern term, which indicates we're going to develop new products. Everybody can play. It's just not ensconced in a big R&D lab at Bell Labs or IBM. Mm-hmm. A lot of us can be involved in innovation. So when I had that experience of developing the sugar cube with my dad's help in a diner one summer when I was 12 years old, he took us to the diner. We had to observe what was holding up table turnover. And we determined that it was ultimately sugar packets that was causing the waitresses and the busboys to take extra time to clean the tables and the floors. So we came up with 3 solutions. We took the sugar cube to prototype. It held the sugar packets that were still intact, along with the discarded ones. It had 4 sides to the cube, so it held advertising, and the diner could use local advertisers to provide advertising. And the cafeteria bought it from us. It was distributed throughout the Baltimore, Washington area. And I learned that problem solving was fun and there was a benefit to being curious. And I brought my first product to market with my dad's help and commercialized it. And so even though I've been in large corporations, I've done startups, I've been in medium-sized companies, I've always brought that mindset with me. So whether I was the entrepreneur in a large company, for example, Bristol Myers Squibb or IBM, I was always the one that wanted to be working on the project where there was a blank canvas, or at least not an overly populated canvas,
right,
developing or designing something new in the corporation. Or when I had my opportunities to do my own startups, I wanted to create something new using the problem-solving methodology. So my whole career journey has really been defined by this innovation mindset. And I think that your career is an arc. It's a continuum. It's not a destination. And so there have been times on my journey where I felt really innovative and I was designing new things and having a great time. And there were other times when maybe my innovation aptitude had to be quelled or it wasn't as full as I would have liked it to be. And sometimes those can be environmental constraints or other things going on in your career or your life. But I think what's important to realize is that if you're dedicated to innovation and the mindset, it is a journey, it is a continuum, it is on an arc. You're not always going to be going at 100 miles an hour, and that's okay. But as long as you're a student of it, you keep it in mind, and you follow your path, you'll be able to tap into it and use it in a way that's meaningful for you. And you're using it at the right time in the right place.
Wow, that is fantastic. I love the arc concept. We experience our careers linearly, but that doesn't mean that that's the most natural construct through which to view them. And so the idea of an arc and that you're building this career over time, and you may not even know what role this experience is going to play down the road. I love that concept. That's fantastic. And the going to market as a child with your dad's help, that's really cool. The sugar cube, that's really neat. Yeah, I love that story. Thank you. So this has been a fantastic conversation, and I don't want to let you go without asking you for advice. So any advice for me and other innovators out there?
Well, the reason that I wrote the book that I wrote, The Innovation Mindset, 8 Essential Steps to Transform Any Industry, was because at different points in my own career, when I was trying to get better and more effective at innovation, I wish a book like the one I had written had existed that could help me avoid the pitfalls, lessons learned could be applied to me so that I could accelerate my path. And so that's what I really wanted to do with the book. Demystify it. All of us have some level of innovation DNA. Maybe it needs to be developed, maybe it needs to be cultivated, but as you pointed out, we were all 5. We've all had a period of curiosity. Sometimes we need to unpack everything and get back to that. But I believe that people are ultimately the most satisfied, the happiest when they're creating. And I think that if we can tap into that innovation mindset, if we can recognize that we have the power, we have the ability to create, to innovate, to bring new ideas to market, new ways of working, new services, that we can really get excited again about our careers and have an opportunity to make a big difference. So I say, if you think that you would like to tap into this, you want to be more innovative, you want to do things differently, you have an inspiration to start your own business or do something different, I say don't wait another moment. Just go ahead and do it.
That is fantastic advice. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And thank you for the conversation. It's been a lot of fun and I've learned a lot. So that's just a win-win for me personally. And I'm sure other people will get a lot out of it as well.
Well, Jared, thank you. You've been a lot of fun to speak with and have made it very casual and conversational and accessible to have this conversation with you. So thank you so much for taking the time to have this podcast and wanting to share your insights and the insights of other innovators with all of your listeners. I'm sure that they really appreciate it. Anything that we can do to spur and encourage innovation is a good thing.
That is well said. I 100% agree with that. Anything we can do to move this conversation forward is much needed in the world today. Lorraine Marchand, author of The Innovation Mindset, 8 Essential Steps to Transform Any Industry. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to staying connected.
Thank you, Jared.
All right. Take care. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this week's show. You can drop us a line on Twitter at Outlast LLC, OUTLAST LLC, or follow us on LinkedIn where we're Outlast Consulting. Until next time, keep innovating, whatever that means.